Hey guys, today I want to talk about a rather underappreciated skill which has mostly fallen by the wayside once its once unintended abuse case got patched in Scourge League. This skill is Doom Blast, a triggered skill that comes from the Impending Doom support gem. This video will largely be split into two separate videos since it will be so long. The first half will talk about the skill itself and the discoveries I made along the way to finding out what feels like the best way to play the skill mechanically, whereas the second half of the two-set series will go more into the actual build itself, how I geared up the character so that it could successfully do all content, most pinnacle content, on around a 25% exalt investment, and also just more clips of the build in action. The reason why I'm talking about the build second is that it does use a Forbidden Shaco, and that's not something that anyone can go for. I also feel that the mechanics going into making the skill playable are more interesting than the actual build itself. The skill will still function on a non-Shaco build, but it will lose roughly in the realm of 40 to 30% DPS and potentially also some defenses, but probably still in a state where it can do a lot of the content in the game. I will have a pub link for my build and also a non-Shaco build that Wolfio made in the video description if you're interested in those. So, what is Impending Doom? Well, it's a support gem that needs to be linked to a curse, and that support gem will trigger Doom Blast once the curse ends. Doom Blast itself does area of effect chaos hit damage, which will do 40% more damage with hits and 15% more damage with ailments per 5 Doom. Because it is chaos hit damage, there aren't too many ways to scale the damage unless you decide to go for poison or crit. It also used to be able to boost the damage of decay support, but that got fixed in Scourge and is why this gem is now so unpopular. You might be wondering what Doom is. So Doom is a rather niche mechanic that only applies to self-cast hexes. This means that trigger, curse on hit, blasphemy do not work and they will not give you any Doom. Once cast, a hex will gain Doom at a rate of 10 per second until it hits the cap, which defaults to a maximum of 30 stacks. Both Doom gain and maximum Doom can be raised through various means. Doom is only useful for 3 things in the game currently. Increasing the effectiveness of the curse by the amount of Doom on the curse, so 10 Doom is 10% increased curse effect, and it also makes Doom Blast and Hex Blast do more damage. When it comes to stacking maximum Doom, getting to 52 is rather trivial. You can get 10 on the tree, 10 on the amulet mod from the Essence of Delirium, and also a final +2 using imbued catalysts on said amulet. After that, the only way to get more max Doom is through inevitable Doom cluster passives. And if you're on standard, you can also find rings with +5 Doom to them as well, but you can't craft them anymore with essences. So now that we know how Doom and Impending Doom work, we need to think about how one would go about actually triggering Doom Blasts, or how we would go about making a curse end. The simplest method is just to wait out the curse by scaling less and reduce duration. This is a pretty terrible method since you still need to wait several seconds per pop, but it deserves a mention because it is one of the methods with the least drawbacks when it comes to mapping, as long as you don't mind backtracking a lot in maps. The second option is to use a unique called Fated End. This ring causes hexes to automatically expire once they reach maximum Doom. If you stack lots of sources of increased Doom gain, you can have curses popping in around 2 seconds, which is pretty good. However, you can get them to pop even faster, and that is by using the Doomsday keystone. Doomsday is a keystone on the tree which changes how self-cast curses interact with Doom. Instead of simply applying a curse and having it gain Doom over time, it applies a curse in an AoE with no Doom, and after 1 second it will detonate, recursing everything in the area, but this time with maximum Doom. This means that with Doomsday and Fated End, you can curse a monster and have Doom Blast trigger on it after 1.5 seconds as long as it stays within the area for the full second. There are also more conditional methods to cause curses to end, so to speak. If a monster dies or is destroyed, that counts as the curse having ended, and it will also trigger Doom Blast. This is the most obvious when a breach is collapsing and the game destroys a cursed monster. It will trigger Doom Blast and net you a few extra kills on the way out. Hex Blast also removes curses, but, well, we're not a Hex Blast build, so I'm not really going to talk about this too much. Finally, the last way is a curse counts as having ended if the curse is removed due to the curse limit. How you can abuse this is through a unique called the Vixen's Entrapment. And it works where if you have a curse limit of 3 and 3 curses socketed in Vixen's Entrapment, like so, casting a self-cast curse will first trigger those 3 curses, filling up the curse buffer. Once the 4th curse applies, it kicks the first curse off the buffer and then takes the last slot. Now, when you recast your self-cast curse, this happens again. So the self-cast curse will be kicked off the curse buffer by the 3 triggered curses, and that will proc Doom Blast, and then the self-cast curse will then go back onto the curse buffer, kicking the first curse off and repeating the cycle. And it would look something like this, and excuse my poor animation skills, like that. And now every time you cast, you will proc Doom Blast once. There was a bit of a meme build around this mechanic, which involved spamming a self-cast curse with alternate quality spell echo to trigger multiple Doom Blasts every second. But the damage was a bit low because you couldn't really gain any Doom except through the Curse Mastery, where 20% of curses you cast just automatically have maximum Doom. When doing research and playing my build, I also came across a bunch of other interesting interactions. Firstly, temporal chains actually affects Fated End. This means that instead of waiting 1.5 seconds, you have to wait 1.7 to 1.8 seconds for your Doom Blast to pop. Normally, that would make what already seems like a clunky build even clunkier, but it actually isn't that much of a problem for reasons I'll explain soon. Secondly, Doomsday only lets you have one AoE on the ground active at any given moment. This means that you can't curse a mob and then immediately curse another one. You need to wait 1 second for the AoE to detonate, or the first mob will only trigger Doom Blast after the entire duration of the curse elapses. Additionally, recasting a Doomsday curse on an already Doomsday affected monster just refreshes the duration and Doom value of that curse, so you really don't want to do that. Doom Blast also has an internal cooldown of 0.15 seconds and a maximum of 3 stored charges, so each curse pop can only trigger 3 Doom Blasts at maximum. This means that you do need some source of explodey if you want to delete large mobs, large packs. So it's a good thing that the one curse-based ascendancy also happens to have one of the best explosion nodes in the game. Apart from that, this isn't really important unless you decide to try memeing up some Worm Blaster concepts. Finally, stacking additional maximum Doom actually has diminishing returns, since every extra 5 Doom doesn't multiply your damage by 40%, but adds to one big more multiplier. And as an example, going from 40 Doom to 50 Doom would have a multiplier of 4.2 to your damage to a multiplier of 5 to your damage, which is only 19% more damage. Now, if you recall the original damage increase that you get from Impending Doom, every 5 Doom is supposed to give you 40% more damage. So instead of 80% more damage, we're actually only getting 19%. And that's just the nature of diminishing returns. And is also why I don't recommend trying to push for anything more than 55 Doom, because at that point, you're really wasting nodes, that passive points that could be used elsewhere. So this takes me to my final setup. I actually used both the Fated End and the Doomsday interaction for mapping, as well as the Vixen's Entrapment interaction for single target DPS. And this leads to a very smooth playstyle. While mapping, you cast Despair once, run through the pack, and by the time you're out of the AoE, the Doomsday AoE would have already procced, and you can then cast Despair once more. It is very important to note that you don't have to wait for Doom Blast to proc before recasting Despair. You only need to wait for Doomsday to proc. That's why temporal chains affecting Fated End doesn't really matter, since you're not casting once every 1.7 seconds or so. You're actually casting once a second the moment you see the Doomsday pulse. Since we are only allowed one AoE at a time for Doomsday, we need to make sure that it is as big as possible. We do this by scaling Forbidden Power and Power Charges, as well as just taking things from the Hexmaster wheel. And then the rest of the AoE for mobbing is carried by Profane Bloom. Because we need to take Forbidden Power and Profane Bloom, and we also want the other 2 Chaos Damage Ascendancies on the Occultist, we actually don't take Malediction, even though we're a curse-based build. This is simply because the 4th curse is actually not that useful, and the only real loss is the damage increase that you get from the node and a little bit of tankiness that you're also missing out on. The actual setup for curses are Despair for the self-cast, since it gets the most value out of 50 Doom, and then Enfeeble, Temporal Chains, and Assassin's Mark in the Vixen's Entrapment. Now, the first curse in Vixen's Entrapment is important. You either want Enfeeble or Temporal Chains, depending on your preference, because that one is the one that won't apply in a single target situation. If you were to look at this diagram here, you can see that because the third curse, Assassin's Mark, can only apply to one monster at any given moment, if you were to curse an entire mob, then the monster closest to your cursor will have Assassin's Mark, whereas the others won't. And so that means that the one monster that you have under your cursor, that one will be missing the first curse in Vixen's Entrapment. But Enfeeble, in this case, will still apply to the rest of the mob. That means that around 95% of the monsters you'll be facing while mapping will have both Temporal Chains and Enfeeble on them, and it makes for a very safe mapping experience. In a single target situation, if you're up against a boss, for example, that boss will never have Enfeeble active on them, and so it's only Temporal Chains. So this is basically how I went about turning Doom Blast into a very playable skill mechanics-wise. While mapping, all you do is run Shield Charge and Frostblink around, and you just cast Despair every second on any mob that you see. This will basically delete the entire screen, and then you just dash around again until you find another huge pack of mobs. You right-click once, and then you just delete them after 1.7 or so seconds. While bossing, it gets a little bit more complicated, but it's still very simple. All you have to do is put down your Wither Totems, make sure you run underneath them to get Brittle Ground, and then, yeah, just cast Despair every second and keep Brittle applied. That's how you play the build. So I hope this has been an interesting exploration into a gem that I don't think many people have given much thought, and I hope you found this enlightening in some sense.